Hi, welcome back to Yapping About Colliders. Previously we covered AABB, a simple and fast method testing for collision between bounding boxes, but one that had sizable pitfalls. So we need a better solution to our original question of if two colliders are overlapping or not. Another solution to this problem is a little algorithm called Separate Axis Theorem, or SAT for short. And it runs off of the principle that if you've got, let's say, two colliders, if there is even one axis, just a line through our world, that separates the two colliders, collision can't be occurring. It's important to note that our axis is nothing more than just a normalized unit vector that we can imagine as cutting through our entire world. Simple enough, right? But how do we get these axes? How do we even test if two colliders are separated by it? Before delving into these questions, I want to talk a bit more about our colliders. Previously, we were stuck with a box for our collider shape, but with SAT, we've got a bit more flexibility, where we can have a variety of different shapes. There is a catch, however, something you'll find in a lot of other stuff we cover. The collider shape will only be valid if it's convex. The reason concaves generally don't work, at least here, is that there's a chance that two shapes don't collide, but from the point of view of the separating axis, they do, as the line can't just bend to fit this gap. The separating axis, once again, is just a straight line going through our world. But the solution to this problem isn't actually all that bad, as we can usually split a concave shape into numerous convex shapes. So if we really need a concave collider, we can just have subcolliders compose it. Back to our questions. The first question asked, how do we figure out which separating axes to test, is simple enough. We can just take the normals of each line or face on each of our colliders and use that. The solution to the second question, how we test if a select axis separates two colliders, will go something like this. First, we capture the given axis we want to test. I'm going to move this axis down a bit to make the next steps a bit more visible. This has no effect though. We then project each of the vertices that compose the two collider shapes onto that axis by getting the dot product between the vertex and the axis vector. For each collider, we can then figure out the min-max positions to get projected onto the axis by tracking the smallest and largest dot products calculated for each collider. These products allow us to draw two lines along our axis. You'll soon realize this looks quite similar to the setup we have for AABB, with two lines on an axis, and that's because it is. All we have to do now is check if the min-x of our first line is less than the max-x of our second line, and the min-x of our second line is less than the max-x of our first line. It's obvious here that these two colliders are separate, with the algorithm detecting that no overlap is present between these projected positions, making this axis our axis of separation, and fulfilling that postulate set at the start of the video. However, if I position the colliders like this, they're obviously still separated, but for this axis, the algorithm detects that they overlap, meaning that this is no longer our axis of separation. So in cases like this, we move on to testing the next normal from our colliders, either until we hit an axis where overlap doesn't occur, and we can cycle back to that postulate, or until every axis has been tested. If the latter occurs, we can definitively say that there is no axis of separation between our colliders, and we can say they're colliding. An extra note that I want to make is that for circle colliders, one where we have possibly an infinite amount of axes we can check, since it's got an infinite amount of sides, we can run a slightly different operation to get the dot products, so that the majority of the algorithm remains the same, whilst now supporting circle colliders. If we have our axis with our circle collider, we can see that the min-max dot products are just going to be the center of our circle projected onto that axis, plus minus the circle's radius. The algorithm then gets continued as normal. That said, we've now got a simple, yet non-intrusive fix to our problem, opening up the ability to have circle colliders. All in all, this algorithm is a positive step up from our previous, with much better precision and more flexibility, allowing us to rotate colliders and have numerous different collider shapes. Yes, it has slightly more overhead and takes a bit more to run compared to AABB, but that slight hit is more than worth it. However, there is one primary issue this algorithm presents, and that's scalability. For 2D colliders, it runs perfectly fine, but if we step up by a dimension, yeah, we're going to be running a fuck ton of axis checks. 3D with this algorithm is possible, but highly unfavourable. That's why I've only been showing 2D colliders. Once again, this ain't going to be our final solution to this collision issue, at least not for a 3D engine. But there's still one more algorithm left to cover, so until then, cheers for watching, and see you next time.